All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's just jump into this episode of The Future Is Now. It's funny because I actually wasn't even planning on making this an episode, but it's just the past couple of days I've just been seeing things and considering, and I've just gotten pretty fed up with this topic, so I decided to make an episode about it. So, number one, this might be a little bit more of an emotionally charged episode, but that's okay. And number two, reminder, this podcast is speaking to Christian believers, okay? People that are in the church, that are part of the faith, that consider themselves to be a Christian, all right? So the reason I always preface that is because, I feel like sometimes correction and critique can seem like it's hateful, but it's really not. Literally the whole entire New Testament, all of Paul's letters are essentially, hey guys, you're really not doing this right, and you should be doing it this way, right? Critique and correction is needed within the church. And so, today we are going to be talking about the wave of church hurt / abuse / hate that's kind of been, rampant in the last couple of years. I just feel like there's just so many people that are getting a part of this movement of hate the church, and man, the church hurt me, and the church isn't healthy, and man, the system is messed up, and all these different things about the evangelical church. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, okay? And there's a lot that I have to say about it. I could make this a really long episode. I'm not going to. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible to try and make it concise. I think it's important. One of my biggest qualms with this whole movement, number one, is that it's being matched. There's so many loud voices of the church hurt me. This is, podcasts, documentaries. Oh my gosh, this happened with this pastor. And there's so much just junk and toxicity that's being spread about the church. And one of the most frustrating things is just how silent the church is. We have nothing to say, right? You have nothing to say. Somebody's just literally saying all these things about the church and about how it sucks and it needs to get better and this and that, and pastors are terrible people, and and it's just nothing. It's just crickets. It's just silence. As if defending yourself isn't okay. Imagine this. Imagine I'm out with my beautiful wife, Adrian, and we're at a nice dinner and just celebrating love, having the time of our lives. And somebody comes by and looks at Adrian and is like, "You suck. I hate you," and starts throwing insults at Adrian. And just insult after insult. And Adrian's sitting there looking at me like, Spencer, are you going to do something? And I'm just sitting there staring at her. And then the dude leaves. And then Adrian probably will look at me and be like, what the heck? Why didn't you say anything? And imagine if I looked at her and I was like, well, Adrian, man, I just feel like maybe let's explore this. Maybe let's see what they had to say, I know you well, and I really haven't seen any of those characteristics that he described you as, and I haven't experienced that myself. But because this total stranger said this, maybe that's something that we should explore and figure out and have a conversation about. That, guys, that is the picture of what the church is doing right now. That's the picture. We're there's so much being said about the church in America, and yet all these Christians that go to church, all these pastors are like, wow, okay, let's consider that. Let's think about this. And it's all just it's all to appease people rather than stand up for the church, which the church is advancing not because of people, but because of God. And I think that the church has always, the church has always been a place of broken people, okay? It's always been a place pastors. If you have idolized a celebrity pastor and they fail and that shatters your whole faith, that's an idolatry problem that you have. It has nothing to do with the church. Let me tell you, the church is fine. The church is actually doing really well right now. Like I have friends that are pastors and I talk to them, and there are churches, believe it or not. Breaking news, there are churches in America that are healthy and flourishing, and people are getting saved every single week and finding hope, and marriages are getting restored, and people are getting delivered from addiction, and all these different things are happening within the church. Whoa, could you imagine that? It's happening every single day, but people are silent because they're not willing to defend the bride of Christ. They're not willing to defend. And it's just like this narrative that's been played out in America right now where it's like, oh, wow, we better be careful because the church isn't doing well. According to who? I had a few people. I mean, you've probably, there's the Mars Hill podcast that came out, and the Hillsong documentary podcast came out. And it's funny because like people are like, hey, did you I listened to the Mars Hill podcast and I was like, not a fan. Whatever. Like I didn't feel like I needed to listen to that. And then the Hillsong documentary came out and I didn't watch it. And there's a lot of people that are like, dude, why didn't you watch it? It's crazy. Right? Why didn't you watch it? And some people are like, oh, I feel like if you don't watch it, you're just turning a blind eye. Turning a blind eye to what? The fact that like there's broken people in the world and sometimes people screw up and do stupid things. Like I don't need a documentary to tell me that. The Bible is full of it. The Bible is full of the people of Israel screwing up time and time again. The Bible is full of people that God called that messed up and disqualified themselves. Like that, I don't need a documentary to tell me that that's not okay. It's like, oh, what good does this documentary do? Oh, this documentary is shedding light. Shedding light on what? That these things are not okay. Everybody knows those things aren't okay. What are you talking about? It doesn't shed light on a single thing. I don't need a documentary to tell me that manipulating people and abusing power is not okay. If I needed a documentary to prove that to me, like you should be wary of being my friend if I need a documentary to tell me that that's not okay. I don't need that. And it's not, this is the same as it has been in history. What I mean by that is like, guess what? God calls people that are broken, that are sinful, to do things for him. And along the way, you're going, as sad as it is, right? As sad as it is, you are going to get people that screw up time and time again and disqualify themselves and hurt a lot of people along the way. But guess what? The church is the only place in the world where there's truly broken people that can come together collectively and understand their brokenness and work to become better. It's ironic that you have all these people that are like hating on the church and they're preaching love in the streets. Oh, you love? Well, the church is the place where the most grace is present. So we have to understand that, number one, why are we panicking? Why are we panicking as if the church isn't in a good spot? The church is in the same spot it has always been, advancing the gospel. And guess what? We're not at the reins. God is at the reins. So I think it's gonna be okay. I'll prove it to you. In Numbers 20, it's interesting. So you have a guy, Moses. Never ever heard of him. Moses is a guy that I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee. Hold on. I told you guys I'm a little emotionally charged about this one. So Moses is a guy, don't know if you've ever heard of him, but there's a whole, God's people, Israel, was enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh, slaves. And wait a second, God called people to be free from slavery? Imagine that. Christianity is against slavery. Okay, that's a different podcast topic. But God calls Moses to free his people, be his ambassador, go to Pharaoh. So Moses goes to Pharaoh. The whole story is, God uses Moses to free his people out of Israel. Now Moses is like the leader, and God is leading them into the promised land. Here's what's crazy, okay? Numbers 20. And this is a little Bible for you guys, because a lot of people that, are saying things that aren't true, it's because they just don't read the Bible. And so in Numbers 20, so you have a nation of Israel that are complaining. Imagine that, right? So all these people are complaining. They're like, oh my gosh, we kind of had it better in Egypt. I wish I was a slave again. That's literally what these people are saying. And you can imagine God rolling his eyes. But what's crazy is God had a promised land for the people. And then in Numbers 20, Moses basically is like, hey, God, these people are complaining. They don't want to go. I don't know what to do. We're thirsty. They need some water. Some water. And God's like, yep, sure. So God says, hey, go to the rock and speak to it and you'll get water. So Moses, out of frustration, looks at all the people of Israel and is like, oh my gosh, we need to give you water again? Fine. And he strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. So he disobeyed God because he didn't do what God wanted him to do, number one. And number two, he kind of took credit for it. He said we when it should have been God. And so because of that, God told Moses, hey man, you're not going to see the promised land. You've taken my people this far, but guess what? Based off of your disobedience, you are now disqualified. Oh, wow. It's almost as if like there was like a mega church back then, and you have a pastor in Moses that, guess what? He disobeyed God, and God disqualified him. Well, now what happens? Oh, Israel must be screwed. All the people, the leader fell. What's going to happen? The nation of Israel, they're all going to crumble away, and God's people are going to be forgotten, and it's all a disaster. No, literally God just said, hey, I got this guy Joshua. He's going to take over, and Joshua takes him into the promised land. Okay? So listen. Okay? The church is going to be fine. You know why? Because first of all, God sees everything and he knows everything. And you know what? It is really sad. It breaks my heart to read about, bigger churches, big movements, people getting disqualified and things happening and real abuse happening within the church, which I'll get to that in a second. But you know what's crazy about the whole story of Moses is like everybody's like, all right, peace out. Moses gets left behind. And in Hebrews 11 in the New Testament, that's why it's important to also understand that there's the New Testament and the Old Testament. And then guess what? They're equal in their importance. Okay. Equal. You can use both. All right. Read the Old Testament from time to time. And so in Hebrews 11, the author is talking about all these great pillars of faith, all these people of faith in the Bible. And obviously this is breathed by God. So this is God's opinion. And you know who they list in that? They list Moses. Wait a second. But he must have been corrupt the whole entire time. And he must have been, everything that he worked for is probably discredited by the fact that he, failed in the end. No, that's not true. And what I hate about this whole movement of church hurt and abuse and Hillsong documentary, oh my God, Hillsong sucks. Hillsong is terrible. Hillsong is the worst. Like, wow, like, oh, I knew it from the beginning. Mega churches, like, can we just like think for a second and realize how much good the Church of Hillsong did? Can we take a second and realize how many people were saved by that church? All the incredible worship music that came from the church, all the incredible disciples, all the advancement of the kingdom that happened as a result of it. Because guess what? Yeah, some things happened in the end that sucked and things happened along the way, but that doesn't discredit the movement that God had within that. Okay? It doesn't discredit it. So stop trying to act like everything is discredited and the world is collapsing and the church is going downhill fast because there was a moral failure or there was something that happened with a church that disqualified people. That's not the case. There are thousands of churches in America that are thriving. And just because something happened doesn't discredit everything as a result. You know how many people in heaven there are going to be because of Hillsong Church? Come on now. I mean, let's think logically here. If the Bible deemed Moses as worthy, even though he failed in the end, I think we can recognize good in the midst of adversity. Okay, so now that we've established that the church is going to be okay, the church is going to be all right. All right, good news. Okay, now let's talk about this whole church hurt and abuse thing. I will say this. I will preface this as there is real abuse that happens in a church. Like some churches, not every church. There is real abuse that will happen in some churches, unfortunately. And that is, guess what? That is not a reflection of the Big C church that's a reflection of broken humanity. I say this time and time again, and it might not be the most popular, opinion, but it's true. We live in a sinful world, and we have the grace of Christ that we live with every day. However, we still live in a broken, desolate, sinful world where people are bad and they will be bad until the end of time, which means that like murder will never go away. Greed will never go away. Abuse will never go away while we are in this world because of the sin nature of the world. Okay? Where there is no abuse, where there is no hurt, where there is no tragedy, that's called heaven. And until we get there, we're not going to experience that. So it's quite unfair to attribute moral failings and pastors failing to a church problem. That is a sin problem. That is a personal conviction problem. That is a relationship with the Lord problem. That's not a church problem. Okay, so real abuse happens. But what's happened is people have tacked on their hurt with abuse. Hurt ain't abuse. Okay, hurt can be abuse, but not all hurt is abuse. You hear me? Just hear me for a second, okay? And I'm not being heartless. I'm just saying there are real stories of people that have been abused within the confines of a church, and that's not okay. And in fact, in James 3:1, it says, hey, you better be careful if you want to be a teacher because you're going to be judged a lot more strictly in the end. And people that truly abuse people within the church context, I mean, they're getting what's coming to them, for sure. God is just, and they're getting what's coming to them. But what I've noticed and what I've seen is there's a lot of people that have been hurt by church. And because of that, like they think that the church is terrible. Okay. Now this is where I'm going to reel myself in here because I could get a lot more indignant about this. So let's talk about being hurt by the church. I've had conversations with people where people said, I was hurt by the church. Yeah, get in line, Sally. What do you mean? Everybody is hurt by the church. What are we talking about here? I was hurt by it's boiled down to a lot of self-righteousness. And I will explain that further. Now, when I say self-righteousness, I mean that people think that they're the center of the universe, and Christians especially. Like, let's talk about scripture for a second. Like when you're reading it, everybody wants to be the hero. Everybody wants to be Moses. Guess what? You ain't Moses, bro, girl, whoever's listening. I hate to break it to you, but like you're not Moses. You are the nation of Israel that's complaining. Like that is actually the imagery of like you're not Moses. Guess who is Moses? Jesus is the better version of Moses. Jesus is the better version of all the heroes in the Bible. We as people are Israel. We're the ones that rebel, the ones that complain, the ones that argue with God, the ones that turn our backs on him, the one that complains about the things that God took us out of. I mean, think about this. When's the last time you prayed for something in your life and then you end up complaining about the thing that God answered, right? We are Israel. And because of that, we can, but when we have this lens that we're not Israel, that we're actually the heroes of the Bible, we become self-righteous. And when we become self-righteous, it means, hey, how dare you hurt me? How dare you hurt my feelings? How dare you tell me that I'm wrong? How dare you hold me accountable? How dare you say that to me? Don't you know who I am? I am a daughter. I am a son of Christ, the living God. I am the most important person on this earth. Did you know that God formed me in my mother's womb fearfully and wonderfully? Did you know that God knows the hairs on my head? How dare you? How dare you hurt me? And that's just the stance that a lot of people have in terms of their relationship with Christ. And guess what? Yes, God knows the hairs on your head. Yes, he loves you. Yes, he's for you. But guess what? This life is not about you. It's not. It's about the glory of God. It's about advancing his kingdom. It's about bringing him glory. It's about showing his love. So when people say, oh, I was hurt by the church and I left, what do you mean? So somebody hurt your feelings, and then you just took that personally, and then you left and you decided not to do what God called you to do. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, everybody's been hurt by the church. The same as everybody's been hurt by anything. Again, we're going back to the sin nature here. Everybody's been hurt by everything. I've been hurt by my wife, Adrian. So we've gotten in an argument. She said something and I go, ow, that hurt my feelings, right? And then, obviously we talk and we resolve it. I've been hurt by bosses in my life. I've been hurt by family in my life. I've been hurt by anything. Literally anything, because that's just the way that the world works. I've been hurt by my church. I've been hurt by my pastor. And you know what I did? I had a conversation and I resolved the matter, because that's what we're called to do. But here's the thing: it's just people, they can't wrap their head around the fact that, hey, maybe you being at a church has a lot less to do with everything going according to your plan, and you just serving in a capacity wholeheartedly so that God's mission could be fulfilled, that God's kingdom could be advanced. Right? That's the point. So this whole church hurt thing is stemming from a big self-righteous issue where people think that they're the best thing in the entire world. And so because of that, they deserve everything that they think that they deserve. And in my experience, I don't work at a church anymore, but when I did, it's funny because people will say that they were controlled by the church when all it was accountability. I mean, do we want to be real here? People will say that the church manipulated them when all it was, hey, we're just holding you to a standard of holiness. And what I found is, like, people had issues with me or the pastor or the church for enforcing rules that weren't even our rules. That's the thing, is like, oh, the church is hateful towards this group of people. The church does this, the church does that. Honestly, it sounds like your issue isn't with the church. Your issue is with God, because God is the one that wrote scripture, God, like breathed it into existence. That's God's heart behind it. The Holy Spirit compelled these people to write scripture. So the rules that you have issue with aren't against the church, they're against God. And if you're mad, like, that people are holding you to a standard of holiness, it sounds like you're just more mad at God. And then that means that you're probably you don't want to be a believer. You don't want to be a Christian. You want to live life how you want to live it. And so because of that, like, stop calling yourself a Christian. People don't have an issue with the church. They have an issue with God. And that's called sanctification when it comes to, hey, like, you got saved, and yes, God is all loving, but guess what? There's a standard of holiness that the church is compelled to hold people to. And if you're not okay with that, then guess what? You're not okay with Christianity. And there's just been this huge, huge wave of, like, all these people redefining what Christianity means. It's like, oh, well, I don't think that should be true. Well, I don't think the church should do this. Well, I don't think Christians should do this. Well, I don't think they should believe this. And at that point, it's like, yo, you're not really a Christian anymore. So, like, just say that. It'll be a lot easier for you. I promise you. It'll be a lot easier for you if you just are like, hey, I'm not a Christian anymore. Because this whole idea of the church hurt me has a lot more to do with individuals than it does to do with the church. Now, again, let me preface, I do understand that there's abuse within some churches, but that is the minority. It's not the majority. And so we have to understand as Christians, guess what? Number one, we have to actually get a spine and start defending the church. Like, we have to bow our backs a little bit and start saying, no, the church is good. The church is great. The gospel is advancing. Stop being silent, okay? Silence in this day and age, it's not okay. It's not okay. Okay? So we need to defend the church, defend the bride of Christ like you would defend your bride. And the second thing is this, man. If you're like, man, I'm struggling with church hurt, like, evaluate it and evaluate, like, how do you step past it? How do you step past the hurt? How do you resolve it? Maybe it's finding a different church, although I will say that's, that could be safe for a different podcast, but that's definitely, not always the solution. But I'm just sick and tired of people that are claiming to be a part of the church and want to deconstruct it, that are claiming to be a Christian but want to do it their way and appease people and love and get love from people the whole way. So this podcast may have sounded more like a rant than it did a teaching. I hope that you learned something. And honestly, I do think that the church is stepping into an era now, unprecedented, that's going to be amazing, where we're going to see change in miracles and deliverances like we've never seen before in our day and age. I truly believe that. But it takes us to step up and say, all right, let's do it. Let's advance. So I love all of you guys. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. Message me on Instagram on, suggestions of series that you want. I think I'm going to step into series soon, start doing, one topic for a couple episodes. I do really enjoy doing that. But thank you guys seriously for listening and bearing with me as I talk about my frustrations. But also I think that it's good to take inventory of how we can become better and how it can become more united. So make sure you guys are sharing the podcast. Make sure you guys are leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell me, leave a 5-star review and write down what you like about it. Also, just to make sure you're pumping this out. That's how it gets shared all across the world. I love you guys. I'll see you next time on The Future Is Now.